There you are. And we're going to go ahead and get started. No real, you can't really say that this book hasn't touched a lot of people. It's been quite a foundational text for me. There's a couple books as an avid reader that you kind of come into contact with and they follow you around. As a kind of a miscreant in the 1990s, I found a copy of Nothing in This Book is True at a local bookstore, and I picked it up. I was in absolute love with the cover. And I thought, well, here it is. I turn off my thing.
Yeah, there it
That's
is.
that's the original one. And then here is the new one. And so let me get rid of my addict here. But with that being said, you know, your first contact with this book is to find out that a lot of the work that Bob's done with Breath Alchemy and such has developed his intuition to understand that even the craziest things you may come in contact with can ring true. And that's how I felt when I initially met Nothing in This Book is True. And so, Bob, you've got a lot to talk about this evening. So I don't know, do you want to get started with?
Yeah, I do want to get started because you're right. There's a lot to talk about, and trying to squeeze it into 90 minutes is an interesting challenge, but we'll see what we can do. The title of the talk is, as you know, Dave, called The Birth of a New Humanity. And so I think it would be a really good idea to set a little groundwork here. What's going on in present moment time is, well, these are rather intense times. I don't think I'm going to get much of an argument from anybody with that. And so the question is why? I heard it said somewhere that if you want to understand what's going on now and have any idea of where we're going and where we're headed in the future, you really need to understand our past. And so the problem with trying to understand our past in conventional terms is that we're told that everything began about 3800 BC in Sumer, and before that, there was nothing but hairy barbarians. But is that really true? You know, I'll tell you what, back in about 1990, 1991, it was a time of just really intense and inspired growth for me. And I quickly started coming to the realization that most everything that we think that we know is just simply not true. It's a nice way of saying that we've been lied to. And I just decided, you know, I'm really tired of buying into these falsehoods. So is it possible to begin lifting veils and to start getting a better understanding of what's really going on here? And the thing is that I came to that with a very strong intention, a very strong desire. I got a jolt, I got a wake-up call, and I was awakened to the ET presence. And I think that's really what started everything moving. And so from there on, I was just led to really, as a function of my total burning desire, to want to lift the veil and find out what's going on. And so what I discovered in all of this is that you think everything began at 3800 BC? Oh, I don't think so. I think it's much more accurate to suggest that we have a history on this planet that goes back at least, what, 500 million years? I mean, how do you, you know, where did it all begin? Where's the starting point? And that furthermore, it's been a seed, a star seed, where advanced civilizations have come from all over the place, stayed here for a while, created brand new civilizations, and at the appropriate moment, everybody is left. And when they leave no trace of having ever been here. So that's interesting in its own right. But it was way back in June of 1992. And here again, talk about magical experiences and about just being led to be in the right place at the right time. I got a letter in the mail that was telling me that I needed to be at a certain place at a certain date in June of 1992. And that was that. That's how I interpreted that letter. It was talking about a guy who'd been around for 52,000 years. His name was Thoth, whom we would refer to as an ascended master, and that this guy had some rather interesting things to say, not the least of which is that our history goes way back, preceding not only Sumer, but also preceding Atlantis. And, basically it goes back for us as humans about 200,000 years. And how we were created by ET races, two different races, and how everything got started, and like that. So I think a good place to pick up to get a sense of where we are today would be with what happened in Atlantis. Now, Atlantis was real, and it's not just a function of our myth, or maybe it existed. It really did. It was an island continent in the Atlantic Ocean. It's at the bottom of the ocean today, but for about 65,000 years, it was alive and well in a very, very thriving continent. And in many ways, we were far more advanced then than we are right now. And the perhaps most primary way in which we were advanced is that we were living in far more from heart-based unity than we are right now. Right now, we are living from our minds. We are mechanical, and mind-based, left brain, you name it. And as such, the greater reality has been lost from us. But back in the day in Atlantis, the typical Atlanteans seemed to understand that on a much, much deeper level. There was, however, a problem that developed in Atlantis when a race of ETs came in, basically without asking permission, and just showed up one day and said, hey, we're here, like it or not. And we didn't like it. They were very different from us. They didn't understand our intuitive way. They didn't know what this unity consciousness was all about, because they were totally mental and totally mind-based. Well, they came in and they tried to take over Atlantis, but they weren't successful in that. That is, they were not successful in doing it covertly. But they learned that if you do it, turn that around, overtly, they learned that if you do it covertly, that's much better. Do it behind the scenes and when nobody's watching. And then you can, you can create all the institutions going the way that you want, and life going the way that you want. So this is what was going on in Atlantis, and it impacted us greatly, to the point to where, without going into the details, there's just too much to cover. I do go into it in great detail in the book, but I'll just say it right here, that something happened that caused this relationship that never did work very well for about 50,000 years. It caused the split to happen. It was time for a divorce. And so the group of Atlanteans that came from offshore, off planet, if you will, basically from our neighbor Mars, they decided, we're not ever going to listen to you guys again. We're going to go our own way. And too bad whether you like it or not. And so what they did was they decided that they were going to recreate the very experiment that got them here in the first place. And we were talking a little bit about Merkabas before we came on, Dave. And so that's the technology that got them here. I'll just talk about that for a moment. You might wonder, well, what the heck is a Merkaba? What it is the universal pattern of creation. I mean, there's nothing that it isn't. But included in what it is that it's a vehicle for interdimensional travel, and it's also a vehicle of ascension. And even though it was initially probably only intended, though I can't say that for sure, but I'll just continue, probably only intended to be used internally. In other words, as a function of our connection to source, as a function of our unity consciousness, where we live and experience our intimate connection to all that is in every single moment, it is possible to go within and create a living Merkaba field that, when it's fully activated, will enable you to travel through dimensional worlds, and also travel through time and through space. And you just go out there and have a good old time if you want to do that. And a lot of folks are. However, there is another possibility, and that is it can be created through technology. And of course, that's exactly what a left-brain, mind-based culture such as the Martians would do. And they came here, it's commonly known as a UFO. And that's how they got here. Well, they decided 16,000 years ago when divorce time came that, yeah, we're not going to listen to you guys anymore. We're going to go our own way. And so their way was recreating this external Merkaba field that, if successful, would have allowed them to totally control not only Atlantis, but the entire planet. It is against universal law, but these guys didn't care. They were that upset at it was divorce time. Well, the problem is that the experiment went totally out of control, and it started creating major problems with the Earth, so huge and so significant that the planet we almost lost planet Earth at that time. But the Ascended Masters came in and literally saved the day. Not that they knew what to do, they didn't, but they were wise enough to ask for help from higher life forms. And what they were given in return was enough knowledge, enough information to save the planet, but not totally heal it. But now to cut to the quick a little bit to help to bring us up to where we are today, I just want to say that we were well, far more advanced, far more sophisticated in many ways. And one of the most basic ways and best ways of seeing it is that there was a grid, an energy field enabling us to move into the higher consciousness that was enabled and active during the time of Atlantis. Now, to qualify that for just a moment, in order to move through the dimensional levels, you can't just do it. The timing has to be there. It has to be timed to the movement of the Earth. It has to be timed to various cycles of the Earth. And perhaps most fundamental and important of all, there needs to be a corresponding energy field above the planet that will allow that to happen. Let's call it a grid. It's based on geometry, very sophisticated geometry, and it kind of looks like a geometrical shaped fishnet that covers the entire planet, if you could see it. So, but even though this grid was alive and well back in the day, the Ascended Masters knew it would not survive the coming changes. And by the coming changes, I mean that what the Martians did was so severe that the Masters knew that just a couple thousand years into the future, the whole thing was going to come crashing down, meaning they knew that Atlantis would sink. They also knew that the grid enabling us to move into the higher worlds would disappear, and that we would tumble down into the lower levels of awareness, meaning we would move out of unity and we would move back into and become our reactive minds. And so that's what happened. And the fall was so severe that it took us about 6,000 or 7,000 years, you might say, to dry out enough to even get to the point to where the higher knowledge of Atlantis could be reseated to us. And that's where history as we know it picks up about 3,800 BC. But still, it's incomplete because it doesn't tell us that it was actually the Ascended Masters and another race of beings that are more commonly known as the Nephilim, who are coming out and reseeding the lost information of Atlantis to us at the time. And so that's how the civilizations began to come back. So there's one more piece of the puzzle that needs to be put in to bring us up to date. And that is that, yeah, the Masters knew that this grid would be destroyed. And that was critically important because without this grid, we were stuck. We couldn't move into the higher worlds. And so then they asked for, and they found a way, they were given permission to proceed to find a way to construct this grid synthetically. So what they did is they went to the Giza Plateau. And the very first thing they did, and this is Thoth, along with two other Ascended Masters that we know as Ra and Aragat. They went to the Giza Plateau and they began to do something very interesting. And this all happened on a fourth dimensional level. They built the Great Pyramid of Giza. You know, everything that we've heard about the Great Pyramid of Giza, it was, no, it's not true. It was built 13,200 years ago by these Ascended Masters, and everything, I mean, it is, the Great Pyramid is absolutely perfect. I mean, it's just flawless in every single conceivable way. And we can't do it today. We don't have any technology that can build a pyramid like that. We can't even come close. Yet they did it flawlessly and perfectly. And the reason they did it is because they then subsequently laid out on a fourth dimensional level 83,000 sacred sites, power situated on power points on the earth, where energy just coalesced and became even more powerful in these certain specific areas than it was in other areas on the planet. 83,000 of them were mapped out perfectly, every single one of them mathematically delineated back to the single spot in Egypt. So what these masters were doing was this is called geomancy, by the way. And what it is the process of very intentionally and very consciously manipulating the energy on the surface of the planet in such a way to have a desired effect about 60 miles above the planet. In other words, they were creating the process of synthetically creating the grid that would allow us to move back into the higher consciousness. Without that grid, we would be history folks. But now, to fast forward into present day time, that grid is alive and it is well, and it is what is allowing the new consciousness to come forth. In other words, we are sitting right on the edge as a planet. We are in what we would refer to as third dimension or third density reality, where it's actually it's the way we perceive it. It's been for 13,000 years the bottom of the barrel of self-aware consciousness. It's about as low as you can go and remain self-aware. Because if you become a consciousness that thinks that you are, that not as think, but is convinced that you are your mind, that's you can't go any lower than that. You're down with the cockroaches if you go any lower than that, and that ain't self-aware. So we're as low as you can go, and we're, however, right on the edge of moving back into the higher worlds. The simplest way of saying that is that when we fell from Atlantis, we moved from heart-based unity and became our minds. And the mind is polarized. It doesn't see present time. It's in a continual state of judgment. And so it is a very, very low way of perceiving reality. So that kind of brings us up to present date. And before I continue, Dave, is there anything you'd like to ask about?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, where do we begin? Because
yeah, really, it's like,
I mean, you kind of briefly touched on just the power of sacred geometry and hinting a little bit at, like, the left-right dimensions of the understanding, and you've gone through it yourself in the way that you had 12 years of emotional training. You talk about that a little bit, and maybe you want to talk a little bit more about sacred geometry, and also just curious as how did you really study it? I mean, I've had the luck of learning how to draw with a compass and stuff like that, and a couple sessions that I've had of studying sacred geometry, I found that there was almost automatically intuitive, logical sense developing, that I was able to pull together ideas when I was speaking with other people that I wasn't able to pull together just without having to sit down and write it or something like that. I felt like, oh, there is something about this study that brings together reality in a different way.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah. What sacred geometry is, first of all, it's a universal language known all throughout the cosmos. And it's called different names in different worlds. Sometimes it's been referred to as the language of silence. Sometimes it's been called the language of light. But no matter what you call it, what it is a very useful way of showing the unity of life, showing that absolutely everything, no matter how separate it might appear to me, because again, that's just a function of looking out at the reality through our polarized minds, where we do not connect the dots, where we do not see wholeness, where what we see in fact is just separation. But it's only a function of our limited perception. And so what sacred geometry is a way of correcting, you might say, that limited perception by showing you that everything is intimately interconnected. And I like to put it this way, Dave. That is that, as I suggested just a moment ago, the mind is it is it doesn't see wholeness. It doesn't connect the dots. What it sees is a polarized world. In other words, it looks out at the reality and it sees itself separate from, cut off from the rest of the reality, and very simply put, it does not believe in unity. So we have had, as a mind-based culture, this internal struggle going on for many, many thousand years. We've got the mind and we've got our intuitive self, left brain and right brain. The left brain being logical, looks over at the intuitive side and says, you're nuts. You're talking about unity of life. I don't see it anywhere. All I see is division and separation. And the right brain is so experiential, intuitive, and in the moment, you know, I'm not sure it really cares what the left brain thinks. But point being, what you have is this struggle. You know, it's kind of like a bad marriage that's not working very well on the edge of divorce. That one side might be speaking absolute total truth, but the other side is perceiving that quote unquote truth through it already is filter called you're bad and you're wrong and I'm right and that's the way it is, and you know, stuff like that. And so communication cannot occur. So you've got the corpus callosum, the poor lonely corpus callosum sitting in the middle, kind of like the Maytag repairman, not being able to assist because its job is to allow communication between the two sides to occur. But how can communication happen when the two sides are in this eternal war with each other? You bring in sacred geometry. And what sacred geometry is a very effective way of showing the mind step by step in the only way that it can be shown, which is logically that absolutely everything is intertwined, interconnected, and there's no exceptions to that, none whatsoever. And what I like the best about it is that it's a very, very good way of showing the holographic universe. Now, when your mind begins to see that the holographic universe is a reality, well, something big is beginning to happen. Before I go into that, let's just look at the holographic nature of things for a moment. If what I said is true, and I go into that in great detail in the book, so I can just present it superficially here in the time that we have, but looking at the holographic universe, one thing we know about a hologram is that you shine a laser through it and a very sophisticated 3D looking image comes up, but it's not real. What it is just a function of how holograms are made. And without going into the detail of how they are made, I just want to say that if you take that hologram and if you cut it into, say, 4 equal pieces, and then you shine a laser through each one of those pieces, what you're going to get is a quarter-sized version of the whole. And so if it's true that the universe and everything in it is a hologram, what that means is that you and I are a smaller version of the whole. What that means is that the entire universe and absolutely all the wisdom, all the sophistication, all the knowledge, you name it, all the joyfulness, without exception, it's all contained within us. Yet our mechanical mind, our reactive mind, is very, very good at blocking that, at keeping us from the experience of our true nature. We do get occasional glimpses, but until you learn to give your mind, give it back to its rightful role, and that is that it was never ever intended to be our master, always and only a faithful servant of our consciousness. And so when you restore it back to its proper role and begin to consider the possibility that your true nature is on your intuitive side, and it's only available to you in the present moment, in that it is your connection to source, to all that is through your higher self, now you can begin to live life as a true presence. So that's what I like about sacred geometry. Now, having said all of that, when I first heard about sacred geometry, I didn't have any interest in it. I mean, sit down and draw those things, it just seemed like, you know, a total, but I did it anyway. And I quickly discovered how wrong I was, that all sorts of insights began to come forth. And basically what I was doing was just, you know, beginning to discover what I just suggested, what I just shared right here in the past few moments. So it can be a very, very useful tool. So I don't remember, Dave, what the question was, but that's the answer. I hope it works.
Yeah, no, it totally works. And yeah, it was just kind of, a brief overview of sacred geometry because you hinted at it in the earlier exposition there. And, we also talked a little bit about the waveform universe, which you go into a lot in the 25th edition. So, that's pretty amazing, and connected in source, and, developing the requisite mindfulness is a difficult task, I think.
Well, you want to talk about waveform universe?
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic because if you just stop and consider for a moment that in the very room in which you are sitting, every universe, every single universe that has ever been created is right there. They're all passing right through your room. And the difference, really the only difference between one and the next one is wavelength. And so what that implies, I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, what if you somehow knew how to shift your conscious wavelength, and maybe there's a couple other procedures that are involved there too, but if you knew how to do that, then at some point you would discover that you had the ability to disappear from this reality and reappear in whatever other dimensional world that you had tuned to. And you would be just as real there as you are here. So the point being, without going into all the details, and I do cover it in great detail in the book, but without going into all the details, the point is that there's many other worlds, and they're all right here, and they're all available to us, and they're all a function of consciousness. And so we've been missing out on that and a whole lot of other things too, because that's what happens when you fall down and become your mind. You lose your connection to source. But if your connection to source is open to you, then at some point the doorway does open. And for most of life, the doorway is open. Goodness sakes, we've been visited by ETs for just a short period of time, about 500 million years or so. And where do they come from? Well, obviously they come from other worlds, and many of them are coming from different dimensional worlds also. And so that's a very real thing. And so the key to interdimensional travel is just the process of discovering that everything is wavelength, and there's many different wavelength universes, and they're all separated in the same way as really musical notes are separated on the scale because of the holographic nature of the reality. So it's not that difficult, but it just is just a matter of just waking up and realizing that it's all contained within us. Now, there's another way to do this too. A very popular way of interdimensional travel is through the UFOs, the flying saucers, as they're more commonly called. And what they are is based on the same technology. If you're flying on a UFO, a little bit different than flying from coast to coast on an airline here, because in order to change dimensional worlds, what you have to do is all the beings on the ship have to link together, have to come together and change their conscious wavelength. And that in turn, with making a 90-degree turn, enables them to tune into whatever dimensional world that they wish to tune into and move into. So this is something it's not new. All of life knows about this, except for those of us who have fallen down to the bottom of the barrel of self-aware consciousness, further confused by the fact that we've been lied to, and this has been covered up in UFOs. No, that's just a myth. They don't exist. Other dimensional beings, nah, we're all that is. Well, those lies are pretty well being exposed right now, and it's just not true. So yeah, life is exciting, especially when you lift the veils.
Well, part of the lifting the veils is then, the 20 circular breathing, and the 5 steps that you talk about in the new edition. Do you want to talk a little bit about that right now?
Yeah, I could talk a lot about that. In fact, excuse me. Uh, so, you know, the times that we're in, I wrote a chapter called The End Time Prophecies, where I give, you know, the different prophecies and predictions by all sorts of, like, mostly indigenous people. And I mean, they've known about this stuff for a long, long time. They got a lot more on the ball than we've considered them to be. The Mayans, for example, are conscious survivors of Atlantis. And so they bring with them the memory of what it was like, you know, as long ago as 26,000 years. And so they knew from experience the distinction or the difference between being in unity and being in separation. Well, here again, we are in the end times, right on the edge of moving from one dimensional world to another. And what that means is that, amongst other things, the energy is intensifying dramatically on the planet. No, I don't think that's going to come as any great news to anybody, but it's just that most people don't know how to deal with it because it's just overwhelming at times. So, but what it is the interface of the two-dimensional worlds, where the much higher vibratory energy of the fourth dimensional of the higher worlds is beginning to interface with the much denser vibratory rate of the third dimensional world, the lower world that we're in right now. And what it's doing is stirring up the stuff. It's doing it on a global scale. The global darkness is coming to the surface so it can be transmuted into the light. This is something that absolutely has to happen, because just as the Martians discovered many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, that the best way to control is to do it covertly. Well, that hasn't ended with the Martians. That's been continued through the Illuminati, the Cabal, whatever you want to call them, for a long, long time right now. But finally, even though they've been able to be the hidden hand behind the curtain for a long, long time, now they're being forced out into the open. So this is a healing that absolutely has to happen. But what it's doing is creating an awful lot of intensity. Duh. It's also happening on an individual level. I mean, ultimately, there's no person on the planet that will not be impacted by this in significant ways. In other words, it's bringing up our stuff too. And so, well, the question becomes then, well, how do you deal with this? And in the larger context, it's nothing less than the process of beginning to move from our minds back into our higher self, into the presence of our intuitive self, our higher self, so that we're reconnected, so that we can experience and live wholeness again. But in order to do that, you have to find a way to deal with successfully that which it is that has been blocking you from getting there. And what that implies, well, the way that I like to talk about it is that we exist in threeness, Dave. And I go into detail in the book of how everything exists in threeness, no matter what you want to look at. And this is really important for making the distinction between polarity and unity consciousness, because when we're mind-based, what we see is polarized opposites. We see good and evil. We're not connecting the dots. We don't see the whole. So we don't see the unifying thread that connects the two extremes. But in fact, everything exists in threeness. Ridiculous simple examples: black and white, there's gray. For hot and cold, there's warm, and you can just go on and on with that. But there's always that unifying point in the middle that connects these two polarities together that you're not going to see in polarity. And so, and when we're living from our mind, we're in what I call our middle self. Our higher self is our unified source, our connection to all that is. But we're blocked off from that, from our middle self. But there's also the third component, and that's the lower self. So the lower self is a child. It's our inner child of when we were from infancy up till about, say, up to 4 to 6 years of age. And all the conditioning that we picked up as a result of becoming mind-based creatures, if you will. You know, how to live successfully in a mind-based world. We have to learn, and we darn well better learn, that there are rules for acceptable behavior. And if we don't conform to those rules, there will be consequences. And so as a result of that, we develop an act. I want to give you an example of what I mean by that. An example I like Just to suppose that you're a little boy, and back in the day, we were both little boys. And so you're 3, 4 years old, and you're sitting and you're kind of pouting, and you're sitting on your bed feeling really sad, and just, just kind of like down and out. And dad comes and he takes a look at you. And what you need in that moment more than anything else, is for dad to sit down beside you and just assure you, give you unconditional love and assure you that everything is okay, ask you what's the matter, and, let's talk it over and everything is okay, and like that. But what did you get instead? You get, what's wrong with you? You little sissy. I want you to be a man. Dad wants you to grow up to be a football player or a Marine or something like that. And so if that ever happened or something similar, then you just got invalidated for these feelings of sadness, for these feelings of guilt, of loneliness, and all of that. And so, but on the other hand, you absolutely need dad because he's got absolutely everything for your survival, absolutely everything. So what do? Well, you learn to suppress those feelings that dad says are not acceptable, but they don't go away. They continue to live in your body in the form of stuck energy that only continues to build and to grow and to fester and to continues to manifest itself to present day. And so that's the problem that we live in a nutshell, of becoming our polarized mind. The judgments that we're continually in the midst of making, this person really is bad and really is wrong, or the situation really is bad and wrong. We believe our judgment, and there's usually some significant emotional charge. I'm really right and you're really wrong, and so around and around it goes in the vicious circle. So how do you ever get to the point to where you can just sort of get on with living your life again? Well, the only technique we've learned is the technique that we learned from childhood. We learn how to suppress these feelings. And so we do everything we can to distance ourselves from the instantly generated unpleasant feeling that accompanies the judgment, the macron, as I like to call it. But here again, that just deepens the reservoir of stuck energy in the body. How do you ever get to the point of learning how to successfully deal with that? Well, the answer is you have to find a way to expand to include it and stop being exclusive of it. Because at some point in life, you will discover, either through the school of hard knocks or maybe a bit more gently in some ways, as I did, that there's some universal principles at stake. And universal law is even more important than man-made laws. But what they both have in common is that ignorance of the law is no excuse. So there are 3 basic universal principles that we need to be aware of. And to be aware of them and to learn to interact with them successfully is totally life transforming. So what are they? Well, the first principle is what I call the perfection principle. And what it says is that you and I are perfect, yet we have barriers to the experience and to the expression of those barriers. The second principle says that with regard to those barriers, if you resist them, they will persist. And that's what I call the resistance principle, that very simply says resistance leads to persistence. But that's all we know. That's all we've been taught. So there better be a third principle, and there is. And that's what I call the harmonizing principle. And what the harmonizing principle says is that if you can stop resisting, come out of resistance and expand to include that which previously you've been holding as a judgment, and doing your best to not feel the unpleasant energetic component, and quite totally come to the opposite and just expand to include it, primarily on a feeling level. If you can find a way to let yourself have a thorough experience of what that feeling feels like, what you will discover is that you have contained within you the ability to transform or to transmute those what had been unpleasant feelings into very powerful, into very purposeful internal guidance systems that not only feel good, but allows you to get on with your life and allows you to just sever the barrier from your mind and open up the connection to your true self, your higher self. So how do you do it? Well, that's kind of like the introduction to the technique that I developed that I call breath alchemy. And breath alchemy consists of a certain breathing rhythm that moves energy through your body. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But it's doing it in a way that allows you to align with the harmonizing principle and to be in total harmony with what you're feeling. Okay, so before I come back to talk about the energy moving through your body, maybe it would be just a good idea to give a demonstration of what this breathing rhythm is, just for the heck of it.
Awesome.
And it's something that you can practice on a daily basis too. So what I'm going to give you is an exercise that I call 20 circular breaths. And what it is 20 consecutive circular breaths. And I'm going to make the fifth breath longer just for the sake of, just to make it a little bit different. I'm going to do 5, and then I'm going to stop, explain for a moment just what I did. And I'm going to do it through my mouth, in and out, because it's a little easier to teach that way in the initial stages. Here I go. Okay, so that's in preparation for the 20 that I'm about to give you. But before I do the 20, I want to tell you a little bit about what I did. And I'll tell you, well, I'll just tell you what I did. Then I'll tell you what it does. What I did was obviously, the reason it's called circular breathing is because you may have noticed that there was no pause anywhere. It just came around and around in an unbroken circle, hence the name circular breathing. The other thing you probably noticed is that I was intentionally, very consciously pulling on the inhale, but doing it not only firmly, but very smooth and very even. So it's not herky-jerky or anything like that. And then without pause, on the exhale, I'm not adding a thing to it, no control, nothing other than complete relaxation. And at the end of the exhale, after relaxation is taken as far as it has gone, as it will go naturally, then I, without pause, begin the inhale. So now here's 20. So that's 20 circular breaths right there. Now the question is, well, what is it doing? Well, if you just took 20 circular breaths like I did, there would be no question as to what it's doing. It starts running all this energy through your body. So what kind of energy is it? Well, it's nothing less than source energy, life force energy itself. Now, different cultures have different names for it. The Chinese call it qi, the Japanese call it ki, and I call it prana. So no matter what you call it, what it is life force energy. It's the energy that makes it's the energy that makes life possible. No prana, no life force energy, no life. It's really that simple. And so it's the most vital element in all of existence. And so it's very useful to learn circular breathing, to learn how to run just tons and tons of all this powerful, pure healing life source energy through your body. So that's the first thing it does. You can begin to readily feel it. The second thing it does is that it doesn't really begin to do this in 20 circular breaths, but 20 circular breaths is a very, very shallow exercise, well, relative to the breath alchemy technique itself, where in a one-to-one situation, I guide people through a session that takes at least 60 minutes, is upwards of 75 and maybe 80 minutes, where you just feel all this energy moving through your body. Now, because it is life force energy, the purest, the most powerful, the most healing energy in existence, what it's also doing in its endeavor to bring to some healing to you is it's starting to lift up packets of stuck energy that you've been suppressing due to judgment. So remember, we go back to our earlier discussion about suppressing emotions. Those suppressed emotions don't go away. They continue to live in your body in the form of what I call stuck energy. And if you don't learn how to deal with them consciously, they start dealing with you, and in very unpleasant ways. They become aches and pains and unwanted emotions and frustrations and angers and upsets and just all sorts of unpleasant things. And in their more advanced state, they take the form of illness and disease. So what breath alchemy is and what 20 circular breaths represents then is the opportunity to transmute that energy. And so you get a taste of it in 20 circular breaths, enough of a taste to begin to realize that, yeah, there's something really real here. And what the 5-step harmonizing method is in the breath alchemy session is the process of embracing the harmonizing principle. And so what does the harmonizing principle say? It says that if you can come out of resistance with regard to these suppressed emotions and learn to expand to include them and feel them fully and thoroughly without judging them, implying that you need to change your relationship from making war to them to making peace with them. But what happens is that you develop your innate ability to transmute that energy into very useful, life-enhancing energy that gets you off the dime, that allows you to move ahead and to get on with life as life is being meant to live. Well, that happens very, very powerfully in the breath alchemy process. And what the 5 steps are specifically is, number 1 is the circular breathing. And so you breathe in this manner where you're pulling fully, thoroughly, and consciously and intentionally on the inhale, yet very smoothly and very evenly, and then relaxing completely on the exhale and keeping this unbroken circle. Then, in order to assist the movement of the energy, you just let go and you relax completely. That's the second step. The third step is called awareness in detail, where you just open up your internal feeling sense and you just allow yourself to feel from head to toe the flow of energy. All this energy moving through your body, wow, it feels like your body is alive. So you just tune in and you feel it and you allow it to be the way it is. What awareness in detail also says is that you learn to tune into the most prominent feeling in the moment, and that gives you most perfect access to these packets of stuck energy, which appear as the most prominent pattern of energy in the moment. And the fourth step is, hey, find a way to make peace with that moment by moment on a feeling level, not making war with it anymore. We're expanding to include it and allowing it to be the way it is so you can feel it fully and thoroughly. And you discover that you have an amazing internal ability to transform or to transmute that energy, to integrate it into your sense of well-being. Now, the fifth step is really the most important one, because what empowers all of this is your willingness. If you don't have the willingness to get out of the mud, nothing ain't ever gonna happen. You gotta have that. For me, it took the form of a burning desire, where I continue to have. And so, and what it means is that life continues to be just an exciting adventure, just keeps going. And so if you have the willingness to produce the result, you don't have to do the first 4 steps perfectly, because the ability is contained perfectly within you anyway. And so just by trusting and letting go, what happens is that your inner awareness begins to take over. Your higher self comes in and starts breathing you. And you're just going along for the ride at that point. So what it is a technique that very powerfully transforms energy and allows you to ride the wave of acceleration so that you're no longer at the effect of all this stuff that's going on, that's coming up, that quite to the contrary, you're able to step up and come from your true nature and be a force of nature and be a leader rather than a follower. You're able to be proactive rather than to be reactive. So it's transformation. It's basic, powerful healing stuff. And it all begins with the 20 circular breaths.
And so this is something that we could do in the morning, just because I've seen videos on your YouTube channel where you're doing it too and stuff, and then kind of develop this ability to hold, I guess. Or
you do it. You can do it every day. Do it in the morning. Do it in the evening. I've also got it on my blog post. It's just a short 5-minute video demonstrating the circular breathing and telling you a bit more about it. So if you learn to do this on a daily basis, what you're learning is how to breathe energy, life force energy or prana as well as air. And that's really the key. That's really the key to discovering and ultimately mastering your innate ability to transform your emotions, to transform suppressed emotions into useful patterns of energy that you can that are now available to you again. Look, we need our emotions. We just need to develop a healthy relationship to them. So we need to learn how to integrate our emotions. And when they integrate, now we have them, we are the master of them. Fear, for example, can keep you totally stopped in your tracks. And this is the method that the dark forces have been using for a long, long time, eons, to keep people mesmerized and to keep them in their lowest self, to keep them obedient and controlled. But when you learn how to integrate that fear, what you're left with is presence and excitement and a very, very deep level of alertness. So depending on whether the fear is imaginary or real, you are in the present moment and you're able to respond and be appropriate. You're no longer at the effect of what had been controlling you. Yeah, so it's powerful stuff. And that's that's kind of like completing the big picture process. So I think an important question to ask it all at this point is just, well, what does it all mean? And to me, what it all means is that you and I are much, much more than, for the most part, we've considered ourselves to be. We're not our mind, we're not our thoughts, we're not our beliefs, we're not the way we present ourselves in the world, and other people aren't either. That's just an act that we developed in order to try and get along and make it appear as though we're normal in life. So the more you're able to let go of that and come from your true self, the more you need to know everything you need to know is given to you in the present moment. You learn to follow spirit from within and learn how to do it without hesitation. And that's where the answer to every need is presented to you. It's presented to you usually intuitively. You're given insights, insights, the light bulb goes off in your head or something like that. And you just know. Life just presents itself to you in a whole new way. So to me, what the significance of that is that, remember the grid, the energy field that's above the planet about 60 miles, that's allowing the new consciousness to come forth. It's alive and it is well, and it's totally a function of our consciousness. So as we wake up, now we are adding that renewed energy of oneness to the grid. And that in turn is creating a critical mass that is allowing the planet to proceed into the higher worlds. That really in a nutshell to me is what this is all about. And so, and my sense of it is that we are creating the critical mass. I don't think there's any doubt, no doubt whatsoever, that we are right on the edge of moving into a world, into a way of interpreting the reality that, well, is 100 times better, let's put it that way, than even in every conceivable way, is 100 times better than even our very best moments here in third dimensional reality. So you just put that in your pipe and smoke it for a moment. Uh, I mean, could you imagine you experienced a joyful moment? Well, what if that was increased 100-fold and that was your constant experience? You experience, the inner light bulb goes off and your creativity and inspiration just comes to you. And, when you're really tuned in, that's how you write books. That's what I've discovered. But what if that was increased 100-fold and it was available to you in all moments? And, I mean, it's pretty darn good when that kind of level of inspiration hits you here. But if it was 100-fold, 100 times greater, wow, 100 times the joyfulness, 100 times the unconditional love, I think, you start to get the feeling that life was really meant to work, and that maybe that's really something really worth going for. Well, how do you do it? Yeah, how do you do it? Everything is a function of consciousness. And we are putting our conscious awareness into that grid. And it's determining how we're allowed to be and where we're allowed to go in ways that are extremely exciting. So if we continue to wake up as we are doing, we will continue to create a critical mass that will allow us to be who we truly are and to live life as it is truly meant to live. And with that being said, it's still only fourth dimension. I mean, there's worlds beyond that. So, I mean, it just keeps going.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, it just makes me, and people can type in questions if they want into the chat. But it makes me wonder about the function then of something like, say, Fukushima that you bring about in the new edition, and you talk about Deepwater Horizon, these kind of catastrophic things that I guess are effectively built into the reality of people who are fear-based, and but they are doing legitimately bad things to the environment. How do we transmute that? Or,
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And the answer is that that's what happens when you're a mind-based culture. What you're doing is you here again, if you're coming from your mind, the polarized aspect of your mind is such that it does not connect the dots. It does not see wholeness. It sees a polarized world in which you and I, as mind-based creatures, are standing apart from the reality, trying to conquer it and trying to control it. And so we don't cooperate with nature. We get in there and we try and conquer it and control it. And it has some tendency to kind of bite back. I mean, I once saw a great bumper sticker that said, "Mother Nature bats last."
Right.
Yeah, bottom of the ninth inning, Mother Nature is up to bat.
Watch out.
You thought you were going to get away with this, huh? Yeah. So there's that. And so it's totally a function of our consciousness. In other words, our lack of it.
Okay.
And secondly, it's also negating the fact that, let me put it this way. Way back in the early 20th century, Nikola Tesla, one of the most brilliant scientists, probably the most brilliant scientist that we've ever had, he came forth and he tried to give the world free energy. Now, with free energy, you do not need internal combustion engines, meaning you don't need to rape the earth for oil and create oil spills like the Gulf oil disaster. You don't need nuclear energy like the disaster in Fukushima, or the disasters waiting to happen with all the nuclear energy plants that are dotting the globe. Goodness, you don't even want to think about that, because if any of them go off, what are you going to do about that? I mean, Fukushima is still totally out of control. Oh, out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, the press doesn't report on it. Doesn't mean that it's not there. Doesn't mean that it's not still spewing radiation into the air. But
Absolutely.
all of that stuff is absolutely optional. So who is it that's been withholding the true technology from us for all this time? And that's the hidden hand behind the scene, the dark forces, the cabal, the Illuminati, the deep state, whatever you want to call them. But their day is coming to an end. And so the technology to clean up all of the pollution on the planet does exist, and it has existed for a long, I'll go further. Not only has it existed for a long, long time, but the technology to cure, to heal all diseases on the planet has existed for a long, long time. Yet it's being withheld from us. Because if you look into the field of medicine, they want people sick because medicine is a big ticket item. It's not about helping people and making them well. Terrible thing to say. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but it's true.
Right.
Point being, though, is that there is a deeper truth, and that is the problem. The solution to all of these problems already exists, and it has existed for a long, long time. It's just a matter of developing enough mass consciousness to demanding that it be released, that it come forth, and we're very, very close to that. I think that what's going to happen, Dave, is that I didn't put it in my book, but I've since written another book, just the manuscript. It's going to be a while before it comes out. And what I discovered is that there is a very sophisticated timeline in the Great Pyramid. I mean, it gives you exact dates of like when the printing press was developed, and just I can't think of World War I, World War II, and just all really important timelines, dates in our history, all accurate. It hit them all. And what the timeline of the Great Pyramid is suggesting, very likely this dimensional shift is going to take place sometime between the years of 2029 and 2030. Well, that's just coming right up, isn't it?
Hang on your seats.
Well, and they haven't been wrong about anything else. I'm talking about the timeline in the Great Pyramid. But I think that what's going to happen in the meantime is that we are going to experience a golden age here in third dimensional reality. And what I mean by that, to dive into that a little deeper, is that the global darkness is coming to the surface to be exposed to the light. There is a principle, a universal principle, call it a spiritual principle, whatever you want to call it principle, and that is that darkness cannot survive in the presence of light. The principle is just the same, really, as that if you walk into a totally darkened room where you can't see a thing, yet you flip on the light switch and the darkness disappears. So what's going on here, even though it's intense on a global scale, is a healing that absolutely has to happen. The dirty deeds must be exposed to the light so that they can be transmuted into the light, so that the truth can be revealed, so that the shackles can be lifted, so that we can step out of the mental prison that we've created for ourselves and to begin to live a life as it was meant to live here on the third dimensional level too. Another way of saying that is that in order to ascend, we must first clean up the mess that we have made here. And that means we have to clean up the environmental messes. And as I've suggested, the solutions have been available for a long, long time. We just have to make them available. We also have to clean up the internal messes that we have made. In other words, the internal incompletions it's very simply the process of healing the inner child, the lower self. And that is learning how to transmute these suppressed emotions, how to integrate them into your sense of well-being so that you can live and experience wholeness again. So what I see, and I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just, wishful thinker, but I don't think so. What I see is that in the very near future, I'll give it 2, 3, 4 years to play itself out. But I think after that, between that time and the ascension of the planet, we're going to be living a life where free energy is the norm, where hover cars that are totally pollution free, running off of free energy, are the norm, and where we have garbage disposal that transmutes garbage waste into very, very useful elements, like clean oxygen and stuff like that. And in the interim, into very usable fuel while we're transitioning into free energy. These technologies already exist. They've been suppressed. We've had free energy machines for a long, long time. There's the N machine I talk about in my book, but the guy can't get anywhere because science won't peer review it, you know, because I mean, they're controlled too. And so we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And when that happens, we're going to experience freedom that is almost beyond our ability to imagine right now. And all of that is only a prelude to what's right around the corner in just a few years after that. But you know,
Signing up.
it just all comes back to our willingness and our ability to do the necessary inner work. And that's to make the shift from our reactive mind to our true self, to learn to make friends with our suppressed emotions rather than continue to try and suppress them. Suppression leads to resistance. Resistance leads to persistence. Persistence and resistance leads to compulsive and addictive behavior. It doesn't work. What works is to find a way to make peace with what is. Gotta stop fighting what is. Gotta find a way to let what is be what is. And it all fundamentally comes back to learning how to make friends with your emotions and to tune in to feel and to honor and accept what you've been resisting so that you can rediscover and live wholeness again, and so that you can be a co-contributor to the critical mass so that you can be a huge part of the solution rather than a remaining part of the problem. So what's going on? I mean, well, Helen Keller said it. I mean, and if anybody ever had a reason to be depressed and to spend her whole life in bed, I mean, she couldn't see, she couldn't hear, she couldn't talk, yet she said life is either an exciting adventure or it's nothing. And that's exactly what she is referring to. When we're living out of our reactive minds, we're not in the present moment, we're just living reactively, we're just seeing the present through our conditioned past, and around and around it goes in a vicious circle. It reduces us to just living life conceptually and to just going through the motions. But when we're living from our true self, now life is a true presence. Life is the exciting adventure that Helen Keller was referring to. And so that's the shift. That's the shift that we're making. That's the shift that needs to be made. And that's the shift that's propelling us into times that are so exciting and so exhilarating. And yes, intense, but intensity can be intensely exciting and exhilarating. It doesn't have to be intensely bad. And that's the shift.
We have a question here from Leaf. Are all of the 83K points on the grid identified?
Ask that again. I didn't
Are
quite
all
catch
the 83K points on the grid identified?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Every single one of them, I just put it out there that they can all be mathematically delineated back to that single spot in Egypt. Yeah, most of them we do know. They were all constructed first on the fourth dimensional level, and then you might say that people got intuitive hits. Oh, just to build a pyramid here or a church there. What it was higher guidance that was coming down and coming through them. The Mayans were very well tuned in. They knew full well they needed to build Chichen Itza right where they did, because it's one of the 83,000 sacred sites. I don't know if we're aware of all of them, because some of them are under the oceans. And so we're probably not aware of those, but they're still there. Now, to link this all together, so that it's not more than just hearsay, there is a man by the name of Carl Monk who researched into this deeply. And what he found was, through his research, he was able to take up to 250 of these sites and mathematically delineate each one of them back to that single spot in Egypt. And I wrote about this in the book, and I gave the details on just how he did it. And so 250, that's just a bit more than coincidence. Even if, only a dozen or so, there's still no possibility that it would be a coincidence. And what it tells you then is that this was a single consciousness that created all of this. And the single consciousness being the single consciousness of the ascended masters, six-dimensional beings who, have a rather expanded view of the reality and just what the possibility is and what we needed to achieve in order to move back into the higher worlds. So yeah, hope that helps answer the question. But
Yeah.
Chichen Itza is a very obvious example. The Great Pyramid is another obvious example. Mount Shasta is a pretty obvious example of a natural site that is just a PowerPoint. And if you are in the presence of some of these points, you can kind of feel the energy, because they're all on nodal points, all where the ley lines and whatever lines cross, so that the energy there is more powerful and can be more powerfully and easily directed in forming this global grid. So it was a very, very, very high level of sophistication and consciousness that created all of this. So yeah, it's real stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We have a question from Joel. Going back to environmental factors, what about pole shifts and environmental factors? Are we in danger, or can human awakening heal all of this? I've gone a bit into that, but
yeah, it's not chiseled in stone that the poles have to shift. They are a function of our collective unconsciousness. In other words, this thing called karma. Karma is a very, very interesting thing. What it means is that you and I, we don't get away with anything. Not one thing. Daniel Brinkley, he brought this forth in his book called Saved by the Light. I mean, the guy died 4 times and came back to tell about it. And what he reports is that when you get to the other side, I mean, he was gone for 28 minutes the first time. 28 minutes on this level is a lifetime in the higher worlds. And what he came back and reported is that you go through a very, very sophisticated panoramic life review where your entire life, absolutely everything that ever happened is presented to you in just rapid fire holographic emotion, but not from your perspective, from the perspective of the other person. And so you get to experience what it was like when you blamed that person, when you made that person wrong, when you did something that, you know what I mean. But it's not done in a way to punish us. It's done in a way in total unconditional love, and to just help us to wake up and remember who we truly are. Well, Daniel came back as a totally transformed person. I know, I met the guy, and I mean, the guy was just alive and bubbling with just life. And I thought, what's going on with this guy? You know, I didn't know his story fully at the time, but now I do. And so the point being that you don't get away with anything. All of our collective misdeeds and everything that we've done, the earth is a conscious living being. And so all of this energy, destructive energy, gets absorbed by the earth. And so just as when we start kicking and screaming in very unpleasant ways as a result of all this suppressed energy within us, that if we don't learn how to deal with it consciously, it starts dealing with us. I mean, the frustrations and the anxieties and all that stuff builds up. And I mean, it can totally consume, and some people are consumed by it. It creates compulsive and addictive behavior and all sorts of undesirable behaviors. And so the same is happening on a global scale to Mother Earth. And so this is what earth changes are. This is why you have volcanoes and eruptions and earthquakes and tsunamis and all sorts of, unpleasant events like that. Well, pole shift is kind of like the ultimate expression of our unfinished collective karma. But it's even more intense than that, because when the poles do shift, there's also a solar flash that comes and basically consumes everything on third dimensional Earth, reducing us to everything gets buried under 40 to 400 feet of rubble. Now, I kind of talked about that in the book, but I did it kind of like in a way where I kind of, oh, this is a story. Did it really happen? But it's real stuff. Now, I've said a lot. The other side of that is that as we wake up, none of this has to happen. Absolutely none of it has to happen. We can clean up the mess that we made. And so when we do that, and if we do that, then yeah, the poles are still going to be shift. They still will shift about 21 degrees, but we will just witness it as a cosmic event. Oh, look at that. Look at the night, at the sky. It's just turning a little bit. Isn't that interesting? It'll be very smooth. It'll be very organic. It doesn't have to be this violent everything all at once sort of thing. But with that said, even if it is, there's no worry here, because you will be, if one of three things is going to happen, and hopefully everybody on the planet will be ready to ascend into the higher worlds. Now, that's what I'm putting out for. And I gave a best case scenario in my book that what we're doing is moving at a very rapid speed, accelerating at unheard of speeds, and creating a critical mass that hopefully will propel everybody through. But that's not what usually happens. And if that doesn't happen this time, don't worry, everybody's going to be taken care of. Because the usual scenario is that really only a small group of people have progressed enough when the shift does happen to make it into the higher worlds. The rest of the beings are literally taken to another third dimensional planet, a planet that is third dimensional, very much like planet Earth, and they are allowed to live out their lifetime after lifetime, to continue to reincarnate on the karmic wheel until they progress enough to absolve themselves of their karma so that they can move into the higher worlds. So, and that's very real too. Let me say, even though I didn't talk about this in the book, I just want to lay this down to give it some more validity. There was a book called Cosmic Voyage that came out a couple of years after my book first came out 25 years ago. And in this, it's about remote viewing. I didn't give it much credence at the time because I didn't really trust remote viewing. But the more I studied it, the more I began to realize that good remote viewers, they're accurate about 99% of the time. And so the guy who wrote this book, he was a remote viewer. And one of the things that he remote viewed was a planet, a third dimensional planet in the Pleiades that was populated with beings that looked very much like Americans. And zooming in closer, he realized that they actually were Americans. They had just gotten there. They had been time traveled. They were confused. They didn't know where they were or what was going on. But as life has it, they will very quickly forget that and just get on with their lives. And they'll be allowed to live out as many lifetimes as they need before they can absolve enough karma to move into the higher worlds. So everybody's taken care of. There is a third group, however, and that is that if there are dark forces that still remain totally, completely unrepentant, that have done us over, I mean, crimes against humanity, and when the truth about this comes out, there'll be no doubt just how dark and evil and despicable these people are. There's no salvation for them. And so there's another document that I kind of alluded to in Nothing, but have dived into much deeper in its sense, and it's called the Law of One. And the Law of One is very much connected to what I wrote about in Nothing, in that it came from the being that we know as Ra, who was participating in the building of the Great Pyramid, who was from Venus, when Venus went through its ascension 2.6 billion years ago. Well, Ra has been around the block quite a few times, and in the Law of One, he just gives these three scenarios. The third being what happens to the beings who are non-repentive, not capable of repenting, so dark, so disillusioned that there's no hope for them. Well, they get to stay here and live out their karma and experience what it's like to be buried under 40 to 400 feet of rock. I'm sorry, but there's no salvation for them. But even with them, their spirit will remain, and they will go through however many eons it takes of redemption to finally be transformed into beings who are a bit more in alignment with what life is meant to be than the path that they've chosen. So that's the scenario that I see happening. And in the best case, we're all going to come through. We're all going to, well, I don't know if the dark forces will, but everybody else, I think, there is the possibility. And the Law of One talks about this. They say that even though it's very unlikely, to ignore it is just to ignore it's contained in the realm of all possibility. And you can't ignore it. I mean, to do it it's not very wise. And so we want to keep the door open and realize that it's up to us. And as we continue to move and to grow and to create the critical mass, then we are opening the doorway that can and hopefully will allow everybody to move through. Exciting
Wow.
times.
Yeah, and so mind-blowingly encapsulated. Do you feel in 2022 we will see and begin to feel more light?
We're
That's a question.
already, we're
Yeah.
already feeling it. And it's just a question of learning how to catch the ride. And so those who do catch the ride, it's literally the ride into lightening up. I mean, living from your true nature. Lightening up is what enlightenment is all about. To lift the burden, to lift the dead weight of carrying around all this stuck energy. Life begins to work again. You know, so it's like it's like that. It's like the cloud cover lifts. The sun was always there, but you don't see it, you don't experience it until the fog lifts, until the cloud cover lifts. And when it does, what you're left with the brilliance of another beautiful sunny day, just like we have right here. And so that's our true nature, and it's available to each and every one of us. And how much light and how much love and how much joyfulness we allow into our consciousness, that's just a function of us. It's totally up to us. I mean, once you make the connection with source, it's available and unlimited. I mean, there's no limit to the amount of joyfulness that is available from source energy. No limit to the amount of unconditional love and acceptance and inner peace. All the good things. The uh, uh, you can go to this. There's a guy named Reverend Ike. He was a preacher back in the day. And he says you can go to the ocean with a teaspoon or a bucket. The ocean doesn't care. And so the limits are if we lift the limits, then we're coming to cosmic energy with a whole lot more than just a bucket. It's unlimited. And so it's just a question of how much we're willing and able to allow to move through us.
Yeah, it's an incredible responsibility, but an incredible gift at the same time, right?
Incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
I just see everything as an opportunity. And I know that's the shift that I made way back when, that everything just became an exciting opportunity. And life has been an exciting adventure, and it continues to be ever since. And all sparked by, all motivated by that burning desire, that inner awareness to just want to keep moving, to just want to keep going. In life, when you've got that, the universe is always on purpose. It'll continue to guide you, and it'll show you where you need to go and what you need to move into next. And if you learn to follow your spirit without hesitation, that is, you'll be given exactly what you need, when you need, and life just starts to work.
That's a beautiful message. I mean, I think so many people have been through some incredibly difficult times, as we talked about, the collective and individual dark night of the soul. I mean, that
Yeah,
to know that we
yeah,
do have some power.
yeah, yeah, and I mean that's just so important. I mean, I, yeah, these are intense times. There's no question about it. They can be intensely dark times for people. On the other hand, they can be intensely enlightening times for people. Everything is a function of consciousness, and it's our choice. So, so the choice I've made.
Well, we can tell. We can tell. I mean, especially, was reading the 25th anniversary edition. I've read once this year and once last year, and it was funny because, as I said very much earlier in today's discussion, that when I first found your book, I mean, it was like a psychedelic experience as I read it, and I just felt like the top of my head was wide open, and I was experiencing reality in a different sort of way. And then, as Harriet indicated, that we're hoping to see more light, and so to be able to find your 25th anniversary edition and read it and realize, hey, Bob's still going for it, and
Still
Bob,
going. You haven't stopped yet.
right, yeah, and bless you for that, because it's been a wild ride and a fun ride. I think everyone should go pick that up. The new edition. It's really got a lot of like little updates, some new graphics in there. You still kept the pictures from Spain in between the chapters there and stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. And well, Bob, we're getting pretty close to the 3:30. Joel made a nice comment. A lot would have to change to allow free energy. And do you want to riff on
Yep.
that really quick?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. In other words, the cabal has to be taken down. And I think we're getting a lot closer to that than you might think. There are things going on behind the scenes that if I start to tell you about it right now, you might, you might think I'm crazy. If I start opening my mouth and expounding about that, there'll be no doubt whatsoever. So
Give
we're
us a
not
hint.
ready,
Give
quite ready
us
to
a
hear
teaser.
that yet. We have to let things play out, but things are moving quickly. And I think within the next year or two, you're going to see changes that right now you would consider to be absolutely impossible. But you just mark my words. You just mark this calendar, and just the difference between now and say a year or two from now, I think the movement that we will have made between now and then is just light years. And I don't think we're that far off from the free energy to being allowed to come forth.
Oh man,
We'll see.
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah. And so, Bob, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to send a recording out to everyone with the email you registered with. You can review because, well, as we were all hoping, Bob didn't let us down. He brought us through an entire tour of several different universes and the ways to move about them. So from East West Books, thank you so much, Bob. It's wonderful to have you back, and welcome back anytime, especially, it would just be great. So thanks again.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day. Good day. Bye-bye.